I recently competed in the 2024 Louisville Pokemon Regional, and here was my experience with it. So I have been a near lifelong Pokemon fan. I've been playing the TCG for the last couple of years, around the release of Crown Zenith and Scarlet and Violet base set. It was originally a deviation from me playing Yu-Gi-Oh! From the year prior, wanting a change but not wanting to go towards Magic the Gathering. This was actually not my first regional. I actually competed in the Indianapolis regional back in May of this year, but this is the first of this new season, and part of my goal to try and score an invite to the World Championships with the new changes of how invites are earned. However, I did just go for the fun of playing the game as well. In Indy, I got a single win before dropping 1-4-0, so this time we were aiming for 2 wins. There's just one small issue. I was very out of practice due to drama, to say the least, started by a local game store owner having an ego trip. I'm not really welcome at the only shop in my area that has consistent Pokemon events. This is a big issue since we live in the digital age with an online client for testing, but you still just miss out on an aspect of not playing in person. I was determined, however, to improve my skills, so let's go into the prep work that I did for the event. So the first thing I had to do for coming back to playing the TCG was what deck I was going to bring to the event. I had not played in person through the entire Twilight Masquerade and Shrouded Fable formats, so my physical decks were a bit outdated. The deck I took to Indy was at the time of Temporal Forces a rogue build of a meta deck, Raging Bolt, but with a Garchomp EX engine. So Bolt was on the table if I was willing to update it to go with the current meta. However, part of me wanted to try out a newer deck to see what I could come up with, ending on Terapagos EX/Dusk Noir. Instead of the turbo nature of Raging Bolt, I wanted to experiment with a more control-focused build of Terapagos that utilized its Crown Opal attack as a way to control other basic heavy decks in the format, such as Raging Bolt. Despite knowing evolution Pokemon were coming back into the meta, especially through stuff like Hydrapple EX and the still prevalent Charizard, I thought it could be a fun way to run the deck rather than the double turbo builds I'd been seeing on the ladder. After a couple weeks of testing on TCG Live and even testing on lunch break with one of my real life friends, I was still torn between the two decks. Ultimately, I trusted my gut and put my faith in the little turtle. I will now do an unscripted breakdown of the deck explaining my thought process of how I built it. Alright, so I'm a bit late to this and I kind of want to just get this video out soon, so here's a digital deck profile rather than a physical one. So this is the Terapagos EX deck that I ran for the Louisville Regional. So starting us out, we have 3 copies of Terapagos EX. I personally feel like 3 is the good number because 4 seems a bit bricky, but 2 just... I'd have too many issues where I'd have my Terapagos prized, and since it's my main game plan, I need 3 copies. Next is 2 copies of Hoot Hoot and 2 copies of Noctowl. I feel this probably could have gone up to 3 if I were willing to cut like Fan Rotom and the Dusclops out of here, but I just feel 2 is good enough for a control variant. Next we have 2 copies of Fan Rotom. This was a pretty not so great choice on my part because I'm like, I want to make sure I can fan call, but in all honesty I'll probably be able to fan call even at 1. 2 copies of Boufflant. Boufflant is a pretty good card in this matchup for different damage calculations. I probably could have bumped it to 3 if I was willing to get rid of the Fan Rotom, but it is what it is. 2 copies of Duskull, 1 Dusclops, and 2 Noir. The Clops is mainly just for the cases where they may have a weaker Pokemon that I can get a quick knock on, or for setting up Briar plays if I've already used Candy into Dusk Noir. Next we have 1 copy of Spearow and 1 copy of Fearow. This was an interesting little tech that I made just because I did not own Pidgeot EX, and I thought it would be a really interesting going second thing to immediately evolve and then search 3 cards. It surprisingly came up in my round 1 match, and I never saw it again for the entire event. And finally, for the Radiant, we have 1 copy of Radiant Greninja. Onto the items and trainer cards. 2 copies of Ultra Ball, pretty standard. 1 Rescue Board, 1 Penny. 3 copies of Nest Ball. I felt 4 was a little overkill, and I'd draw into it a little too much. 2 copies of Research to guarantee that really good hand turn 2, trying to set up the Spearow Fearow plays. 2 Iono, 1 Arven, and 2 copies of Boss. We have Briar just to guarantee some of the matchups. Like in Charizard, this can really just make or break your game. One copy of Lacey. This is kind of a cope card, but I feel like sometimes Ionoing is not great when your opponent also has a bad hand, so Lacey has the opportunity to give you that little bit of edge. One copy of Rod, one copy of Vacuum, and one Countercatcher, followed by 3 copies of Underdepths and 1 Crispin. Crispin absolutely can just steamroll your opponent if you can get it immediately. 3 copies of Glass Trumpet. Not many builds are running this. I feel like this is a very good card that people just aren't respecting enough, because it just helps me set up Terapagos again if it were to get knocked out. 2 copies of Buddy Poffin to try and ensure the Fan Rotom. 1 Sparkling Crystal, 1 Rare Candy, and 2 Earthen Vessels. And finally, for the energy, we have 3 of Electric, Grass, and Water. Pretty standard stuff, so just get Crown Opal into rotation and just consistently lock down my opponent's playstyle. Alright, back to the main video. But with that all said, on Thursday, I went to bed and prepared for the regional to come. The morning of Friday the 11th of October came, and I set off from my home in Illinois to Louisville, Kentucky. It was a very pretty drive, albeit I wish I recorded more footage of it for this vlog portion of the video, but this was more of an afterthought. After a roughly 4-hour drive, we made it to the city, and after about 30 minutes of looking for parking before the hotel was ready to check in, we went straight to the venue of the event. So this was my first regional going to being ran by Gaming Gen rather than Day 2 as the tournament organizers. I'm not too familiar with this company, but compared to the one I went to in Indy, I was a little underwhelmed. Not to say that it was a poorly ran event, far from it. I think they did an amazing job setting it up. My main complaint was with the online presence. Let me explain. So, a side event schedule was not posted until a couple days before the event. Normally, this wouldn't be a large issue if there were descriptions for the point values of the event and descriptions of what they were. I don't doubt that they would have been straightforward if I asked around, but I would rather have read descriptions before committing my limited free time of the event to these events. But that is just a small issue since I was there for the main event and the vendors. Speaking of, there were a lot of the same vendors that were at Indy at this regional as well, but it seemed that there was a much smaller vendor presence. Here's a map provided by the company, and this right here is the vendor row. I'd say it's roughly half the size of what it was in Indianapolis, but if we're gonna be fair, the overall attendance as well as the venue size was a bit smaller than Indianapolis. Like I said, these are just small nitpicks as someone who's only been to one other regional that was rated by a different TO. But the vendor row was very nice, and I picked up some cool stuff to bring back home with me while we were just chilling out on Friday. And I went back to the hotel and rested up before the main event. So the day finally came, and I was very nervous. I was wondering if bringing a more complex build of one of the most represented decks in the format was a mistake instead of taking the safer Raging Bolt bet. But it was already past time for deck submissions. I was locked in, had to play Terapagos, so I was ready for it. Here's my round-by-round breakdown of the matches I played. First round begins, and I brick really hard against Miraidon. A slow start leading to me getting completely swept by Iron Hands, but I had hope that this could be easily countered with the Crown Opal strategy that I had built in. Game 2, I lock in and have a good start and have Crown Opal set up to prevent damage, but he had all his copies of Boss's Orders to bypass that, starting on a loss, but surely the next round will be better. Next round, and it's up against Lugia. Game 1 was close with a fast start and lost to my opponent having Boss's Orders at the right time. Game 2, I'm in a winning position and I fumble by overthinking and using Penny to get damaged Terapagos back, but then use Greninja for card draw, and that caused me to not have any energy, another 0-2 loss. This was a very interesting match. Iron Valiant EX with Blood Moon Ursaluna, a deck that I had not seen at all prior to this event. Game 1, my opponent scooped after my second turn. I had Crown Opal set and they had no real way to recover. Game 2, it went longer with Blood Moon taking out some smaller Pokemon. It came down to my last prize. I had Boss in hand, I just needed to survive. My opponent switches to Blood Moon Ursaluna EX and attacks, but forgot to account for the Bouffalant damage reduction. If he had put a little more chip damage on the Terapagos, he would have sent us to a Game 3, but that was the first one of the regional, and I started to think, I can do this. Round 4 was very short and sealed my fate of not making day 2. I did not account well for Greninja EX. I was quite humbled by the frog and got tabled in under 10 minutes. Even with my chance of day 2 gone, I was still hopeful of some good matches to take place, but little did I know what the next round had. I'm just gonna say this for anyone who goes to a regional or any big event. Even if you aren't going to make day 2, or if you're already sealed out of Top Cut, please report cheaters. My round 5 opponent was an older gentleman playing Charizard EX Pidgeot. Game 1, and he starts with 2 Charmanders and a Rotom, and set up fast, winning quick. I shook it off because I knew this wasn't going to be a great matchup for me, but then Game 2 rolls around. 2 Charmander and a Pidgey, followed by top decking the Rotom. That's when I realized he most likely was stacking his deck. The statistical odds of this happening is really low, but him then getting Sealstone for the Rotom, I just wanted to call a judge, but I was just ready to be done with this guy, and I wasn't going to pull a Game 3 anyway unless he was given a game loss. I honestly wanted to drop and get food, but I was still determined that I could win at least one more game. Now, I can't prove that this guy was cheating, however, just based on the statistics, he's either very lucky or based on just kind of his demeanor and appearance, it seemed very real that he could have stacked. This isn't like some salty little cope of, oh, well, Jeebs, you can't play the game. Well, I can. It's just a matter of, it's annoying when someone's being smug and you can just tell something's up. So at the start of this round, I was a bit tilted seeing what I was going up against after my previous match, Snorlax stall, but that was not going to stop me from trying. Game 1 ran pretty long, but I conceded as I saw that I had no other options to win the game and wanted to try to push for a third game. Game 2 went into time, and on my second turn of turns, I was able to clutch out the win, ending in a tie. However, my opponent circled my name on the match slip and marked me as a win for Game 3 that we didn't even play. He explained that he was going to drop and I could have the win. Nightman was an absolute bro and changed my perspective for the rest of the day. We did it. We hit 2 wins. That's all I came for. Let's just enjoy the next 2 rounds. Also, there's a side note that I probably should have mentioned before. Due to the lower attendance, we only had 8 rounds instead of the typical 9. But that's not a big deal. That just means that I'd have to go like 6-2-0 to get a day 2 invite. But, you know, it's one of those things where you just kind of play with it. So I did not have a round 7. My opponent was classed as a no-show, so a free win, and I should have used that to get food, but I just roamed the vendors and waited for the last round because I was like, I can tough this out as my stomach growled intensely. The final round, and for the first time, a mirror match in the day. I got completely destroyed by the faster pace of Terapagos with the double turbo hitting me each turn, but their deck was very well put together and they deserved that win, ending my day with 3-5-0. After finishing in the 1100th places out of nearly 2,000 players, I got food and went to bed. The next day, we made our way back home to Illinois. I'm not disappointed with my performance. I did better than I thought I would and was piloting a deck I kind of feel less comfortable with. But would I go back and play with Raging Bolt instead? Yeah, but also not really. I see this as a good experience regardless of the deck I took. I did better than I was thinking through scenarios on the fly, and bad matchups better than I thought I could. However, I am a little tilted that Bolt won the whole event, but it is what it is. I feel that this regional in Louisville showed me how important practice is going to be going forward in future regionals. Aside from the fumble games, I was not nearly prepared for the meta that I was going to be playing into. The online ladder only gives you so much information from the amount of games that you're able to play. Even if I could find a store to play in my area that isn't ran by people who are problematic, to say the very least, I can still devote more time online and to community ran tournaments that will expose me to more variety and connect with more players. But that will be it until next regional. I'm not sure if it'll be San Antonio or Milwaukee, but I know I'll be ready.